All right, welcome to a bonus episode of Locked On Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil, sitting in the front row of Kaseya Center just a few minutes following Pat Riley's annual end-of-season press conference, and a ton of interesting stuff to get to on this, David. Um,
Thanks for the
goes through a couple of different things, right? Talks about how great of a season it was, unexpected NBA Finals run. Discusses some of the nuances of the CBA. Said that him and the Heat front office were actually upstairs today trying to go through some of the new ramifications of this new CBA and potentially what a second luxury tax apron could mean for the Miami Heat in terms of their roster construction. So they're deep in the weeds on that. They are deep in the weeds in terms of draft evaluation, which is important to note. And then, went along about Udonis Haslem and Dwayne Wade's Hall of Fame induction. But to me, David, my big takeaway was calling Tyler Herro an anchor, going so far as to preach patience with this roster and say, we've got our veteran star in Jimmy Butler, and we've got two young anchors in Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro. And Tyler Herro, as we know, was just signed last season to that 4-year extension, 4 years, $120 million. It kicks in this upcoming season. They were not going to trade him for Bradley Beal. Pat Riley talked about patience on multiple occasions. Of course, in this scenario, in this setting, Pat Riley can't talk about Bradley Beal or somebody like Damian Lillard by name, and he didn't. But he went so far as to preach patience over and over and over again. And again, calling Tyler Herro an anchor on several occasions. If you are somebody that looks at this team and you're playing with the trade machine and you're ready to deal Tyler Herro anywhere for whatever star, it doesn't sound like Pat Riley is doing the same thing.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. The evaluation there from Pat Riley, after the season, he said we missed Tyler, that he was a bucket getter and a guy who steps up big in the fourth. And he talked specifically about the Orlando bubble. And he said, this is a player who rose to the challenge on that occasion and that he would have been a big part of Miami's run throughout the playoffs. I'm not sure how realistic it is. And, of course, we can't look back and foresee how Tyler would have impacted that finals match if they would have even gone to the finals with him there. But it's pretty clear, as you were hinting at, that Tyler is a part of this team moving forward.
Or that Pat Riley feels very strongly about him. Went so far as to say something like he's a big player who gets bigger on the biggest stages.
Right.
And coming from somebody like Pat Riley, it doesn't. Yeah. And only 23. And coming from Pat, that's something that that means something. That's meaningful.
Yeah. No, I have to agree. He said, first of all, look, there's a lot going on right now. I can't really talk about it. I can't really get into the specifics. Didn't want to get into the free agency and all that kind of talk, hinting at the draft being a big part of the process. But if there's another takeaway from me, it's just that I would expect that this team is going to be not fairly static. I don't think they're going to necessarily run it back, but they are going to maintain this core moving forward, and they're probably going to be making some changes on the fringes to improve this team that they didn't expect the finals run necessarily, but now that they've realized this team is good enough, he thinks this team is good enough to have won a championship, that it's about improving and maximizing on Jimmy Butler's window.
Well, our friend Ira Winderman asked him point blank, is this team good enough with just subtle changes?
Right.
Will subtle changes do? And he said, yes, subtle changes will do. Subtle changes will be good enough. I hear what you're saying. I don't know that I'm willing to go so far as a prediction of this is going to be the team with some subtle changes, that it's going to be sort of run it back sort of again.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what Pat Riley is saying is that they'd be okay with that. I think Pat Riley is communicating out to the media and out there to perhaps the NBA world at large that we're not going to be desperate the way that the Phoenix Suns were and trade good players, young players who we like, and draft picks, obviously, and in your entire future for, a 34-year-old Kevin Durant and almost 30-year-old Bradley Beal. We're not that desperate. We're not going to do it. And guess what?
They didn't.
They weren't that desperate, and they didn't do it.
Right.
And Phoenix did do it.
Right.
Most recently with Matt Ishbia going all in on the Bradley Beal deal. But I think if the right deal were to come along, they would evaluate that and potentially make it if they thought the price made sense. But I also think that with the way that this team is planning things this season and long term, especially considering that this team could be nudging up against the second apron and all these things, if they make a big swing like for a Damian Lillard, that they're going to say, you know what? Maybe if we can get Damian at the right price or whatever, superstar X the right price, we'll look at it and we'll see if it makes sense. But if it's going to him in the way that we could build our roster, because he went pretty long on the limitations of second apron, talking about how if they had this second apron and the roster restriction rules in place when they had the Big Three era, we wouldn't have been able to add Shane Battier, Ray Allen, Chris Anderson, Rashard Lewis, and all these guys who helped them go to the NBA Finals 4 different times.
Right.
And I think it was a good point. There's a lot of stuff in Pat Riley's press conferences that are sort of a walk down memory lane. But when you stick with it and your eyes don't glaze over, there's a point somewhere there usually. And I think the point he was making was it'd be one thing to have a big three, right? With, let's call it Damian Lillard, Bam Adebayo, and Jimmy Butler. But if we can't put the pieces around that big three, then maybe that's not going to do it enough for us. And maybe it will. I don't know. It depends, obviously, on what you have to give up and send out in any kind of trade. How many draft picks is it going to be? What kind of young players does it involve, if any young players, right? In any kind of trade. Yeah. So
building a top-heavy team like that makes it more difficult with the new CBA to assemble the pieces around and get a much more well-rounded team.
Because
which is why a lot of people question Phoenix. That as much talent as they might have, that doesn't necessarily lock them into a title favorite. I mean, they're certainly a contending team. Just when you have 4 really, really good all-star level players, well, 3.5 and DeAndre Ayton. But either way, you've got really good talent there at the top, but the rest of the roster a little bit more shaky. And it was a good point. I'm glad you brought it up. The fact that they couldn't have added Rashard Lewis, etc., to that roster because it would have been so set with LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh that you wouldn't have been able to make those changes.
Chalmers.
Yeah. He's the half. He's the 3.5.
He's the DeAndre Ayton.
3.5. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't. Like, it is hard, as Wes was saying. It's hard to parse through everything that he goes through during the course of the press conference because there is a lot of not meandering pointlessly. He has a point to make, but
he goes on a journey and he brings it back to what the point is.
60 years of basketball to
he's got
kind
a lot
of parse
to say.
through. Yeah, he made a 1970s Phoenix Sun run that he was a part of that.
We got our annual PJ Brown reference. It was all the Pat Riley. He played the greatest hits. He mentioned Bruce Springsteen. It was all the greatest hits.
But he did say, and this was an interesting thing, that he thinks of this upcoming season and offseason perhaps as the 5th iteration of team building. He looked at the first being Zoe and Tim Hardaway, so 1996 on, and adding PJ Brown, et cetera, to that core. Then, of course, Dwayne Wade and Shaq in 2004. That was the second iteration. The Big Three was the third iteration. And then the Jimmy Butler era beginning in 2019 was the fourth. And now it's Jimmy plus. How do we add on to this existing core to put us into that 5th iteration of
so that's not a run it back because we just had the 4th iteration. So it's not a run it back. So my thing is, what is that 5th iteration? And that's why I keep going back to this. First of all, run it back is impossible. It's not. Because you can't, just by the nature of free agency, you're not going to be able to bring back Gabe Vincent and Max Strus and keep Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson. You're going to be paying way too much to that backcourt. So in any way, that backcourt is going to be shuffled and look different. So that's I guess it depends on how you define run it back, but just in terms of one roster being the same to another season, the way it basically was last year, it's not going to be the case this coming year just because a lot of these guys are free agents. But I do think that there's going to be subtle whatever. And he said that subtle changes. You should expect subtle changes. So if you're a Heat fan pining for change is coming. I don't know how major of a change it's going to be, whether it's whatever you do with the 18th pick, draft a player there, trade down, get a veteran. I don't know.
How do you marry the two? It's like if this is a 5th iteration of this team in terms of like title contention, but we're not going to make that many changes. I don't.
This is where I'm taking Pat Riley's words when he was preaching patience and literally said we're not in the business of trading draft picks for just anything, and preaching patience and talking up Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro to so much of a degree that he was presidential debating this stuff and taking a question not about Tyler Herro and turning it into a question about Tyler Herro, and going out of his way. To me, that was communicating to the media, to Heat fans, and to the NBA world at large, we're okay with running it back. Now, running it back in quotes, depending on what you define that as. Now, I think there's truth to that. I think that there's also maybe setting up of, we don't know if Damian Lillard is even going to ask for a trade. We don't know if that's on the table. We don't know if that superstar thing to make this 5th iteration is on the table. We don't know if it's going to happen. So if it doesn't happen, if it's not even available to us, a trade that makes sense for us, where we're not pushing way too many chips in for something back like Bradley Beal that's not worth it, if that's not available to us, then we have to make it known that we're okay with this team and that we think that this team is good enough, or else it's just going to be miles of disappointment by Heat fans. And I think they saw what the reaction was last year, and I don't think they liked it. And I think that this is a little bit of hedging your bets. And I don't mean that to say that he was lying. I do think that he really loves Tyler. And I've been on here a lot. I've told you a lot that there's this well, you have to play both sides because this is the beginning of the offseason. We have no idea what's going to happen. So I think that is a little bit of that. I think there's truth to him loving Tyler Herro. I truly believe that, and I've been saying that for the last 2 years, that this team really loves Tyler Herro more than I think the average fan thinks they like Tyler Herro, considering how often he's thrown into trade rumors. By the way, not by the Miami Heat, trade rumors by the media, so they have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Or just Twitter fans. I shouldn't say the media. I hate doing that. The Twitter fans and whatever. But I think that's part of it. Or the fifth iteration could be, hey, Damian Lillard just asked for a trade.
Yeah.
Maybe this makes sense
kind
for
of
us.
open-ended. He also said, look, this was something else noteworthy. He said, I don't want to pause. And he kind of referred to the pause in between Alonzo Mourning and his kidney disease, kind of putting their window of title contention, shutting it closed.
Yeah.
And then going on to, Dwayne and Shaq. That was a pause in between those two eras.
And then the Chris Bosh getting sick.
There was the pause in between 2008 and 2010 in the assembly of the Big Three. So he recognizes this past 4 years, this has been a kind of pseudo title contending window, and he doesn't want to just like punt the rest of the next seasons or two while Jimmy's in his prime. So it's going to require a change. I also don't know, given what he said, if it's going to be an immediate change, something that happens this summer, or if it's something more in the future, which again, given the CBA and the changes that it brings with it, change is going to be much more difficult to implement.
And I think that's the whole point. He's not predicting the future because he can't. And I think he's leaving it. You used the word open-ended before. I think that's purposeful. I think it's supposed to be open-ended because he has no idea what's coming down. He has no idea. Damian Lillard has not asked for a trade from Portland, right?
And that's what it would take. That's what it would take for him to join. He has
Probably.
to say specifically, I want to join the Miami Heat.
Yeah, I think that's what it would take. I think that there has been a lot of conversation around Damian Lillard lately. I do think that if he were, based on all the reporting around what Portland is doing right now with that number 3 pick, it sounds like they're going to use it on either Scoot Henderson or Brandon Miller out of Alabama. And if they go that route, Damian Lillard's not going to be cool with that.
Right.
And at that point, after Thursday night, on Friday morning, or maybe it's as early as Thursday night, does he go up to Portland? Does he call up Joe Cronin? Does he call up, Portland's general manager and say, it's been real, but we're not going to go this direct. I'm not ready to go this direction. So let's start working on a trade to go in another way. And I think based on some things that I've heard, there is a lot of momentum heading towards, if Damian Lillard were to ask for a trade, that the Miami Heat would be his preferred destination.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, the question then becomes, how much does Portland care? And how much are they willing to work with him, take care of the greatest player in franchise history and say, you know what? We're going to send you where it is that you want to go. He does not have a no trade clause the way that Bradley Beal did, but he has a lot of leverage. Sam Amick was on the show yesterday saying Damian Lillard has a lot of leverage with that team and with that organization and his agent and what he means to that city. Like, there is a lot there that could provide Damian Lillard enough leverage to. And by the way, we've seen players list preferred destinations in the past without a no trade clause and get their way there. Kevin Durant with Phoenix just a couple months ago. So this could happen. And I think that the Heat are aware that this is something that could happen, but isn't necessarily going to happen as we sit here on a Tuesday afternoon. And so when you hear Pat Riley talk about all these things, it's open-ended for a reason.
Yeah, no, it's a good set. Well said. Yeah, he's been the good soldier there for a lot of years. When they, weren't sure what kind of team they had before his emergence as a superstar, it was the LaMarcus Aldridge era, et cetera. There was an idea that he could be a great player and that he stuck with it. They traded away a lot of those players when they had Robin Lopez as a contributor, Nick Batum, et cetera. They had a really good Wesley Matthews. That was a good squad there, and he's kind of stuck with it through all these different iterations. He's never bad-mouthed the team. He's never said anything about the ownership struggles or
and he's had a lot of success. I know we define success as championships, but a lot of deep playoff runs, a lot of winning, a lot of playoff moments, some of the great moments in Portland Trail Blazers history outside of the title.
Gametime.
And yeah, I mean, look, he's paid his dues, man. Like, he is not going to be, if he is worried about, hey, if I leave Portland, I'm going to be just like all these other superstars that are leaving teams. Nah, man, you are way past that.
Carmelo Anthony.
This isn't Carmelo. This isn't Kevin Durant. This isn't even LeBron, who LeBron at least has the rings to back it up at every single move. But this
LeBron,
is not,
in the sense of it, at least he worked with Cleveland. It was a sign and trade. They got something back in exchange.
Sure, but he's moved teams several different times.
Right,
He's not known as a team jumper, and I think if he were to leave Portland now, would not be known as a team jumper. He was a guy who literally saw this through to the very end of whatever his era was. And just because he's not playing for that team anymore, it means that era might be over, but his career does not have to be over. And he can finish his career somewhere else. And by the way, he just had his best statistical season of his career at 32 years old.
Right.
Still a very, very good player.
We should talk about the Bam Adebayo reports, because even as we're recording this just hours earlier, Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports saying that they're preparing a massive trade package
for Bam Adebayo, and also mentioned Paul George in there. My read on that is maybe a last gasp by Portland to say, hey, we see your OG Anunobys, we see your Pascal Siakams, we see all this stuff.
We're going bigger.
We want to go bigger. And we want to get you that apex superstar, that top rung name, like a Paul George or a Bam Adebayo. And obviously, that's not going to happen. It does. Like, the Miami Heat are not in the business of trading Bam Adebayo.
I mean, we should say that specifically. Like, I mean, I know a lot of Heat fans are kind of waffling about the impact of Bam or how they view him, and maybe he's not 4 or 5 or whatever. They're not trading Bam Adebayo. They love him here in this. They talk about him as a centerpiece, as the future of this franchise. He's not getting traded. I can't imagine a trade for anything short of Nikola Jokic.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to make that move. I don't think the Clippers are in the
process of
trade.
Not if they're going to add
number
Chris Paul.
3, like the 3rd pick, like for Scoot Henderson and Brandon Miller to I guess Kawhi Leonard and maybe Chris Paul. Like, that doesn't make sense for the Clippers. So all these things are out there because they specifically do not make sense.
A lot of smoke screens.
When you see these reports, and look, Jake Fisher does a very good job, and I believe in what he's reporting. Okay. But I also think part of it is when you look at this, who is this coming from?
Right.
And who does it serve? Especially right now in smoke screen season, right? And to me, this is, hey, this is Portland putting this out there and saying, we're really trying. We want to get you that superstar. Yeah. But hey, it's not out there, man. Look, we tried our best. We put this crazy package on the table for Bam Adebayo, and the Heat said, no, we did our best. So what do you want to do now? And Damian Lillard, because we're taking Scoot or Miller at number 3.
Right.
So what would you like to do here? And I think they're going to work hand in hand with Damian Lillard to direct him to where it is that he wants to go, whether that's Miami, Brooklyn, or somewhere else. So there is a lot of momentum on that front, but we'll also see what ultimately happens Thursday night, because on Thursday night, the number 3 pick can come around.
Yeah.
Portland's picking, and they swing some sort of deal that nobody saw coming. Zion Williamson or something. Who knows, right? I'm not predicting anything. I'm just throwing out names because it's fun. You mentioned sort of the way that Pat Riley, I want to get back to the press conference here in a second, and Tyler Herro.
Right.
I think one way to read Pat Riley's comments about Tyler Herro, talking him up as much as he was, is kind of what we were just talking about, the way that Portland is putting reports out there about Damian Lillard and what they want to try to get. Is it leverage? Is Pat Riley and his comments about Tyler Herro, I think there is a way to read that as maybe just trying to establish some leverage. This guy is a big playoff guy. I know he didn't just play in the playoffs, but he gets big in the biggest moments. He's only 23. He's super skilled, super talented. Is that him pulling a sales job?
I don't see it that way, just because I think that's not how other GMs work. They don't just take a comment in an end of season press conference at face value and be like, oh, that's Pat Riley talking highly about Tyler Herro.
In other words, he's not changing their mind about Tyler Herro.
They've seen enough over the course of 4 seasons of Tyler's career to gauge what he is as a player and what he can be, and evaluate that personally in terms of his potential and what they've already seen. They're not going to just take Pat Riley saying, no, trust me, he's really good. We really like him, and be like, well, okay, holy shit, if Pat Riley really likes him, then we'll trade Dame Lillard straight up for him. That's not how it works. I think it's an earnest appreciation of Tyler as the player that he is and what he can contribute, despite the fact that he was not available during Miami's playoff run. And again, we missed him. He believes that he would have been a factor in this playoff run. And it's impossible to foresee exactly what kind of factor, but I think he's appreciated here.
Yeah.
And we've seen enough of that over the course of 4 years too. Like, people wanted him traded 3 seasons ago, 2 seasons ago. It's like, oh, well, he's never going to develop. He's too small. He's too undersized. He can't push off. He can't create space. Let's throw him in this trade scenario for James Harden. Let's throw him in that trade scenario. He hasn't been traded yet. He wasn't part of the Bradley Beal offer. He was never going to be part of the Bradley Beal offer because they think that highly of him here. So I think it's beyond just another smokescreen. I'm sure they wouldn't be beyond that sort of machination, but at the same time, I don't think it makes that kind of an impact either.
You can have it both ways. You can love Tyler Herro,
and when then the right offer comes up, absolutely,
and, like, you could do it. And so that's So I asked you the point somewhat facetiously, I guess, because I agree with you. But I think it's worth pointing it out and having that conversation. If Pat Riley was selling anybody to me, if he was selling anybody during this press conference, he wasn't selling Portland's general management. He wasn't selling any other NBA front office. I think he was selling the fans.
Yeah.
I think he was pitching the fans a sales pitch of, if for whatever reason we can't, because the other thing I think is they're not going to go all in for just anybody. They're not going to just pull some trade just to make a trade. They're not going to shake it up just to shake it up. they think that there's things that this team needs and maybe stars that could become available who are not yet available down the line that they could potentially add.
Yeah.
But if that does not happen, then I think they've also set it up to be where, hey, maybe we can make some subtle moves here and there and put ourselves over the top. Maybe that's enough. And if and when that happens, we can look back on this press conference and say, well, Pat Riley just told you.
Yeah.
Pat Riley told you that this would be enough. So you better believe it. And I think that's maybe, if there was a sales pitch going on, it was Pat Riley selling that vision to the fans, if that has to happen. Although I have a hard time thinking that's going to be plan A.
Probably not, but again, you can't control what 29 other teams do.
No, exactly. That's the point. That's the point.
I think you prepare for both possibilities.
Yeah,
and
that's
I think
exactly
that's what makes this team different, is that they're able to acquire said superstar when they become available, but if not, they can pivot quickly to say, okay, here's how we build around what we already have.
Okay.
And that's the kind of flexibility that they've tried to maintain over the last couple of seasons, why they had it for Giannis, why they've had it for other players. They're committed to winning, and he said specifically, Mickey Harrison is committed to winning, that in terms of any concerns about the luxury tech or going this much over.
He did leave that open as well in terms of maybe surpassing a second luxury tax apron in repeat years and all these things. He basically said, like, if Mickey Harrison's open to winning, so in other words, if the team's good enough, yes, we'll pay
here. Okay,
I mean,
but a lot of people are concerned about that.
I mean, the towels could have been nicer during the playoffs. I'm gonna die on that hill, but I do think that there is a appetite for this organization to say, okay, if this team is ready to go for a championship, if we think this team can win a championship, we're willing. And by the way, they're in the tax now. They are in the tax right now. And a big part of avoiding the tax last year was because they knew with the extensions that they had coming in this year with Jimmy Butler and Tyler Herro that they were going to be in the tax this year. So they wanted to avoid that repeater tax. And that was obviously before the new CBA was agreed to. And that's not as much, whatever. That was the whole point. This team has an appetite to pay and go into luxury tax if it is a championship caliber roster, which obviously it is by virtue of them being in the NBA Finals. We'll see how the offseason plays out. Let's end this with just whatever other notes and observations that we got from the press conference. I did ask Pat Riley point blank kind of, what are you looking for in terms of skill set and need this offseason? And he basically said, we're looking for wing length and versatility.
Yep.
And did also mention shooting, but really double down on wing length and versatility. I found that interesting, especially with Miami holding the 18th pick and a lot of those kinds of guys projected to be available around there on Thursday night.
Yeah, that's another thing, and kind of interwoven into your answer. I would go so far as to think that they're probably going to keep this pick and make a selection, unless, again, unforeseeable things change regarding a trade to Portland for Damian Lillard. They're doing their draft evaluation. They're looking at a player that they're looking to add, because he even mentioned, I think this is the first time that we've ever seen a Pat Riley team saying, this might be the future in terms of adding players very cheaply on rookie scale contracts. That's how you build out the rest of the roster, considering it's going to be so much more difficult to make changes in the future, as far as not being able to add a buyout guy, not being able to pick up minimum contracts and things of that sort. It's going to be much more difficult.
Straight up said, like, in terms of trading draft picks, future draft picks, he's like, we're not going to be in that business anymore.
Right.
And the point you make is a very good one. And I think these future draft picks, these first rounders, are going to be that much more valuable now, because it's going to be harder to do those things if you're nudged up against that second luxury tax.
Right.
But at the same time, if that's what it costs to get you a superstar, then that's the tough conversation you have to have, especially if that new superstar kind of catapults you into that second luxury tax apron or past it. So this is not easy stuff. Pat Riley and the Heat front brass are up there right now as we're down here with all the drilling and hammering
making
and nonsense.
Changes down here. They're making changes up there.
They're trying to figure this out. We're trying to figure it out. We'll see what happens. Speaking about the draft, we do have Adam Spinella from the Box and One newsletter and podcast joining us tomorrow morning to talk about all the Miami Heat's options there at number 18 and some of the key storylines going into Thursday night's NBA draft. We just had Sam Amick on to talk about the latest intel regarding what he's hearing with Damian Lillard, what happened with the Bradley Beal stuff, and why the Heat didn't make that deal. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of great content coming out right now. And if you want to, by the way, hear the entire Pat Riley press conference, it'll be up on our YouTube page shortly in full.
Yeah, it's not the off season around here for us. So if you want to continue to get great Heat content, you know where to do it, and make sure to subscribe wherever you get podcasts.